Now, as most of you probably know, WEF, Water Environment Federation, is a non-for-profit association that provides technical education and training for water quality professionals. WEF's 36,000 members proudly protect public health, serve the local communities, and support clean water worldwide. We've been doing this, WEF, since 1928. WEF is one of the sponsors. The other co-sponsor of this session this morning is the Northeast Midwest Institute. The Institute is a nonprofit organization located here in D.C. NMI is dedicated to promoting the economic vitality, environmental quality, and regional equity for 18 states in the Northeast and Midwest. They have participated in many partnerships concerning watershed issues, including large basins such as the Chesapeake Bay and the Mississippi River watershed basin. Given the critical and growing impacts of nutrients on water quality across the United States, WEF has, for some time, been focusing on understanding and communicating the role of nutrients in water quality management. We have sponsored several briefings over the last 2 years on both the impacts of nutrients on water quality and current best practices and innovative approaches to controlling these nutrients, particularly from agriculture. One of the innovative approaches discussed at our last briefing in June was the Ohio River Trading Program, of which my organization, Orsanco, is a partner in its development. Very proudly so. Now, this morning we're going to hear from the United States Geological Survey's National Water Quality Assessment Program, we'll call that NAQUA or NAQUA, about a new decision support system that they've developed that can be used by others to guide action on excessive nutrients in rivers and estuaries. This briefing builds on an impressive record of almost 30 briefings offered by USGS NAQUA over time. I might mention that NAQUA is the only, as I understand it, agency charged by the Congress to assess water resources and the effectiveness of programs. And they do this very well with a very, very small budget, I'd like to note. Many of you were here last year when the USGS released the results of a comprehensive national assessment of nutrients in streams and groundwater for the United States. Of course, nutrients are important for plant growth, but when they occur in our rivers and estuaries in excess amounts, they can cause algal blooms that increase the cost to drinking water, that limit recreational activities, it threatens commercial fisheries, and can be toxic to humans and wildlife. The USGS findings show that concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus were 2 to 10 times greater than levels recommended to protect aquatic organisms in most agricultural and urban streams across the nation. Perhaps more importantly, their analysis showed that despite major federal, state, and local efforts to control point and non-point sources of nutrients, concentrations have remained the same or increased in many streams and aquifers across the nation since the early 1990s. This is even more vexing a challenge when considering that over $90 billion annually is spent by the wastewater treatment industry to protect and restore the nation's surface waters. One of the important outcomes from the USGS work has been the development of nutrient models for streams that can be used to predict how conditions might change in response to alternative management actions. From them, they recently developed an online interactive decision support system that allows anyone to evaluate the water quality impacts of reducing nutrient levels from various sources in targeted watersheds on downstream receiving waters. This morning we have 3 excellent presenters for you. We're beginning with Mr. Wayne Anderson of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Wayne is currently principal engineer in the agency's watershed program, leading the development of Minnesota's state-level nutrient strategy. Wayne's mission is this morning is to set the stage by convincing you of the importance of monitoring and modeling, embodying the construct of action plans to deal with nutrients. Following Wayne, we will hear from Steve Preston. Dr. Preston is currently NACWA's National Coordinator for SPARROW model development in the 6 major basins covering most of the continental U.S. that we will talk about today. Specifically, Steve will describe how these regional nutrient models can be used to prioritize area for nutrient reduction actions, identify which sources contribute the largest amounts to downstream waters, and evaluate combinations of nutrient reduction levels and see the estimated impacts. And then hitting cleanup, shall I say, is Sayed Walls. Sayed is the Chief Engineer for the Division of Water Pollution Control of the State of Tennessee, Department of Environment and Conservation. She's going to show you how such models are actually being used in her state. Before we get started, let me advise you of the packets available for pickup at the door. Hopefully most of you have these. In the package you will find a paper copy, I know, of Steve's visuals that you will see, I think, also on the screens as he presents his remarks. And other really good information about the SPARROW model. And I particularly want to note the page that has the endorsements. That always catches my attention. You know, when people that know, are saying good things and this is good, that helps convince me that this is something perhaps is a game changer, and I think it is. After completion of this formal briefing, if you want to stick around a bit longer, our group here can give you actually an online demo. But wait, remember those commercials, but wait. There will also be a webinar this coming December 2nd. So remind yourself and tell your colleagues who could not make it today, and the information on that webinar is in the packet. Okay, so you have a second shot at it, if you will, and people who can't be here have an opportunity to learn about this SPARROW model in early December. And finally, I might say, the grounds for our session this morning. Time permitting, I'm going to hopefully be open to accept a couple of burning questions for each speaker as they conclude their remarks. Okay, relative to their remarks, please. So when Wayne, Steve, and Sayed complete their remarks, if we're running on time, I'll certainly open to the audience for some questions. Please keep those questions to the nature of their presentations. Now, after all presentations, and time permitting, I certainly hope so, I would hope that we can have a good Q&A about the SPARROW model and be able to, again, get all of your questions answered. And number 3, let me confide that I have a 32-year career behind me refereeing football. And I'm a moderator of this session. Well, I'm a referee of this briefing. And I will throw the flag, okay, for any unsportsmanlike conduct, okay? Or I will whistle the action get if I see that the play has gone out of bounds, okay? I want you to learn about the SPARROW model. I want you to learn about the SPARROW model. Its importance as a tool in managing and improving water quality, and to get a feel about its actual use. Now, as an engineer that I am and longtime environmental agency administrator, I really think, and I say this because I heard a presentation about SPARROW before my own Board of Commissioners a couple of weeks ago, I really think that this is game-changing stuff. Okay? Game-changing stuff. And I hope that you will come away from this session feeling as I do. So let's get started. Okay? Wayne, the podium is yours.
In November 2008, Minnesota voters went to the polls and cast a close political vote. The outcome was uncertain for weeks after the election in the race for senator. The clearest winner of statewide elections on that ballot, with 56% of all who cast ballots that year voting in the affirmative, and exceeding any candidate's vote total, was a constitutional amendment dedicating an increased sales tax of 3/8 of 1% to fund outdoor habitat, water quality, parks and trails, and arts and cultural heritage. Exit polls indicated that clean water was the biggest driver to the amendment's passage. Here's the message. The Minnesota public has set water quality as a priority, and with that support comes expectations of results. We must make sure our water quality monitoring and modeling efforts are up to the task to support the development of sound, cost-effective nutrient management decisions to protect the valuable water resources of Minnesota. Minnesota is a land of water richness. Even our license plates boast somewhat modestly, Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes. The actual inventory exceeds 11,000 lakes greater than 10 acres in size and over 21,000 lakes that exceed 2.5 acres in size. In addition, we have 69,000 miles of natural rivers and streams and an additional 21,000 miles of ditches. We have the most shoreline of any of the lower 48 states, a longer shoreline than California, Florida, and Hawaii combined, including 680 miles of Mississippi River, almost 30% of its total 2,350-mile length. While water is important to our culture and our economic vigor, including a major economic return from tourism with over $11 billion in receipts and sales, we are also blessed with other important natural resources from the land, including forestry and agricultural production. The land is represented by 3 major ecological systems with a mixed forest in the northeast, agricultural prairie in the west and south, and a broadleaf forest in between. A sprawling population center of over 3 million people is located at the confluence of the Mississippi, St. Croix, and Minnesota rivers. Agriculture is a major economic contributor, as well as land use in the state, with 54% of the land, over 27 million acres, in agricultural use. Minnesota is the 12th largest state in the nation and lays claim to the 6th largest agricultural receipts of all states, with over $15 billion in receipts annually. Major agricultural commodities relative to receipts include corn, soybeans, hogs, dairy products, and cattle and calves. The Twin Cities has the largest wastewater treatment system on the Mississippi, above St. Louis, producing an average of 260 million gallons of wastewater per day. From 2 million residents, or about half the state's population. The first large city primary treatment plant on the Mississippi River was located in the Twin Cities in 1938. One of our most recent point source accomplishments was the separation of wastewater and stormwater sewers, significantly reducing wet weather discharges of untreated sewage. At a time when the public is reevaluating priorities in the face of a lengthy recession, the Legacy Amendment mentioned at the beginning of my remarks provides a projected $250 million per year over the next 25 years. Of that money, 1/3 is dedicated to clean water, with an additional 1/3 for fish and wildlife habitat, and the remaining 1/3 for arts, cultural heritage, parks, and trails. Minnesota is taking the watershed approach to protecting and restoring our surface waters. We are coordinating around Minnesota's 81 major watersheds. These are watersheds of roughly about 1 million acres in contributing area. We have established a rotational 10-year cycle to assess conditions, determine watershed stressors, and establish protection and restoration strategies, and implement those plans before we adaptively begin the cycle again. During the assessment and planning parts of the watershed cycle, we are evaluating water quality conditions, setting pollutant loading limits, identifying priority zones, and evaluating solution scenarios, all while enhancing citizen engagement. Data is provided both during the assessment cycle as well as continuously for certain data sets. Included in the monitoring program is an important new water quality focus with long-term dedication of 79 major watershed load monitoring sites. Intensive water sampling occurs throughout the year at these sites, capturing loading at 4 points of the major watersheds. Data will be accessible to the public to track trends, as well as to watershed managers to evaluate progress toward goals. Watershed intelligence, such as provided by SPARROW, is important to getting to the outcomes we desire while utilizing our resources efficiently. Monitoring and modeling watershed processes are the bread and butter of watershed intelligence. We have used SPARROW to help prioritize watersheds for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Mississippi Healthy Watersheds Initiative, and look forward to using the new MAPR utility as well as the decision support tools to prioritize watersheds and plan effective water quality protection approaches. Watersheds link the land and water resources through a complicated set of biological, physical, and chemical processes. Gathering data on watersheds is necessary and expensive. In our current biennium, we will spend 13% of our legacy funds, about $22 million, on monitoring and assessment, as well as 19% on TMDL studies and plans. The majority of funding, 59%, will go to on-the-ground protection and restoration activities. Doing the right things in the right places in the right amounts is the challenge. Engineers and scientists utilize computer simulation models to aid in the determination of cause and effect relationships and evaluation of remediation alternatives. These folks, who are a combination of artists, scientists, and engineers, identify the most important watershed processes and provide decision support for understanding watershed conditions, sources, transport, and fate. Spatial and temporal scales can be varied and have a significant effect on model selection and data requirements. Modelers have been compared to sketch artists. Unlike sitting at length with a portrait artist that attempts to be as inclusive as possible in portraying nature's nuances in the subject, the caricaturist or cartoonist is able to create the reasonable representation by focusing in on critical attributes of the subject. Whether to entertain or to emphasize a message where they exaggerate a characteristic to make a point, they are skilled in portraying a subject in a way that captures the essence of the subject. The best modelers take great care to provide the appropriate level of model sophistication and model integrity. When I had a caricature portrait done at a fair several years ago, afterwards I protested that the drawing didn't look like me. The person in the picture was smiling, but a little fat. My wife, touching my arm, just said, "You could lose a few pounds." The artist had made a humorous but important observation while doing it for entertainment. It started me on the road to losing 25 pounds. While the cartoonist may infer something about the subject in a way they portray or emphasize certain attributes, the watershed modeler determines the critical systems and data needs and provides the objectivity to ensure model integrity. The result is that the decision maker is able to better understand critical processes and decision impacts. Police sketch artists provide a more serious service than the caricaturist, since they take sometimes limited data as provided by a witness and construct a portrait of a person of interest. The idea is that they can take a memory-based description of facial or body characteristics and provide a reasonable representation of a complex system, the human appearance. This type of modeler can be very controversial, especially when cases arise where witness descriptions provide data that are not accurate. While these artists can be an important part of solving a problem, they are basing their representation on sometimes uncertain data. Like each of these cases, modelers and models are dependent on accurate data to ensure their representations portray an accurate picture for the watershed manager. Some models have process-based physical equations that require little data for calibration. Other models utilize empirical equations based on monitoring data and are pre-calibrated. Watershed modeling without adequate monitoring data relative to the land and water in the watershed is just as risky as the artist who imagines the subject. The stakes are important and the public expects results. In order to meet Minnesota's watershed needs, whether addressing impairments in our lakes and streams or making collective reductions along with our sister states to meet the goals for Gulf of Mexico restoration, we need monitoring and modeling that is up to the task. Thank you to the sponsors of this event, the Water Environment Federation and the Northeast Midwest Institute, and to the U.S. Geological Survey for inviting me to participate today.
Wayne, thank you very much. Very concisely done. Very much appreciated. We certainly now have time for anyone who might have a question that comes across their mind for Wayne on So, does anybody might have a question for Wayne? Okay, then we will move right along. I've already introduced Steve Preston, so I will not do that again. And just invite Steve to now talk in the specifics about this SPARROW model and the work USGS has done. Steve, proceed.
Thanks, Alan, and Wayne, and thanks to everybody for coming today. As Alan described in his opening remarks, excessive nutrient loading and its effects on water quality are significant issues that can impair both public and commercial uses of the nation's waterways. To support efforts to reduce nutrients, the USGS National Water Quality Assessment Program has developed a set of computer models that will help identify those areas that contribute the largest amount of nutrients to streams, as well as track those nutrients as they move downstreams. To provide access to those models, we've developed a new and innovative system that will allow anyone to access both the model results and actually use the models themselves to test nutrient strategies. So as Alan described, these models and new online system can support nutrient reduction actions in a number of ways. Three important ways are to provide a means of prioritizing areas for nutrient reduction actions, relating upstream sources to downstream loads, and testing the long-term benefits of nutrient reduction strategies. The USGS is currently evaluating the status and trends of water quality in 8 regions of the country that cover the full extent of the contiguous United States. As part of that effort, we've developed water quality models for 7 of those regions. That includes nutrient models for 6 regions, including the Northeast, Southeast, Upper Midwest, Lower Midwest, Missouri River Basin, and the Pacific Northwest. We've developed salinity models in the arid Southwest to help protect water supplies there. And we have an effort underway to develop nutrient models in California. That effort is still in progress. So today I'll focus on the 6 regions where we have completed nutrient models. Our models are designed to simulate the processes that lead to excessive nutrient levels both in local streams and in downstream waters. In the simple schematic, what you see is a section of stream. We refer to that as a stream reach. The drainage area to that specific reach we refer to as a catchment. And at any point on a stream, the collection of catchments above that we refer to as a watershed. To build a model, we start with published estimates of the amount of nutrients that come from sources like fertilizer and wastewater discharge. We track those nutrients as they move from the landscape to the streams and then through streams. We account for nutrients coming from upstream, and we mix all of those inputs and processes in such a way as to match actual water quality as indicated by monitoring information. Monitoring data are really the eyes of the model. The model predictions will reflect what the monitoring data represent. And because of that, we spent a significant effort in compiling as much water quality data as we possibly could, including any from federal, state, and local monitoring agencies. The result of that effort is that we're able to compile enough data to calculate annual stream loads at 2,700 sites throughout the country. That large water quality database, to build that, we initially started with national databases, including the USGS National Water Information System, and also EPA's direct. But then we supplemented that with numerous direct contacts with regional, state, and local agencies to ensure that we also included data not included in those national databases. What we found was that compiling data on a national basis, there are a number of complications in doing that. Those include inconsistent reporting to national databases, as well as inefficiencies in some monitoring programs. We believe that these types of limitations in our collective monitoring efforts combined with shrinking resources may significantly limit our ability to build models like the ones I'm about to describe in the future. For example, we've done some preliminary estimates of how many of these sites are still in operation today, and what we found initially is as many as 40% of those sites would no longer be in operation for the current time period. The modeling approach we use, we refer to as SPARROW, which stands for Spatially Referenced Regressions on Watershed Attributes. To build a SPARROW model, we start with monitoring data, compile as much of that information as we can, and use that data to calculate annual stream loads. We relate those stream loads to various types of geographic information that describe nutrient sources, like fertilizer and wastewater discharge, and also landscape characteristics that affect delivery to streams, like soil type and slope. We relate all of those data through a digital stream network, which provides connectivity upstream and downstream. And once we integrate all of that data, we can calibrate the model to best represent the measured stream loads. With a calibrated model, we can then predict stream load in every stream reach in the area that we're considering. For the regional model, that includes anywhere from 8,000 to 13,000 stream reaches, depending on the region. For each of those reaches, we can estimate nutrient load, which is the amount going past a given point in the stream at any particular time, concentration of the mass in a given volume of water, or yield, which is the mass coming from a specific area of land. So the data sets that we compiled, a number of them were newly developed as part of this effort, or they were greatly expanded. We put significant effort into building a national point source discharge database. We also developed some new landscape characteristic databases. For example, one describes the natural sources of phosphorus coming from different features. We believe that based on all of that data integration, that this is probably the most comprehensive effort to date to assess nutrient load. Having said that, there are a number of ways in which the basic information for assessing nutrient loading needs to be improved. We rely for building these models on existing data sets. Those data sets are developed by other agencies for other objectives, and so our models are constrained by the characteristics of those data sets. For example, when we first started this effort, we used the most current information available, and that included land use and agricultural input information for the year 2002. We believe that that period is still relevant today, but everyone would like to have more current information. And so there's a need for improving the efficiency of compiling and building some of these databases that will support models like this. Even more concerning is that some data sets that are critical to tracking progress toward improved water quality simply do not exist or are not available. For example, there are no publicly available national databases that describe the implementation of management practices. Without that type of information, we cannot demonstrate the benefit of those actions. And in other words, we cannot relate the expenditures of implementing those actions with actual measurable improvements in water quality. As an example of the types of predictions that models can provide, this map illustrates nitrogen yields for all the catchments in all 6 regions. Nitrogen yield is the amount coming from a particular area of the catchment. In other words, for every square kilometer of the catchment, this is the mass that comes from that. So this map provides a good indication of where nutrient inputs to streams is the most intense. What we see here are predictions for more than 240,000 stream reaches throughout the 6 regions. The darker colors are the areas where the nutrient yields are the greatest. And what you see is the largest area of high nitrogen yields is in the upper Midwest, but there are shade represents a different type of source, as indicated by the legend on the lower left. And what you see here are agricultural sources, as indicated by the orange and the yellow colors, are the largest sources in the upper Midwest. Atmospheric deposition, as indicated by the blue, is important in a number of areas of the country, particularly those with an absence of other sources. And for example, northern Minnesota, along the Appalachian Ridge, and in northern New England. And then urban sources, as indicated by the red and the pink, are important in various areas of the country. The combination of those two maps gives a good indication both of where the nutrient inputs to the stream are most intense, as well as what the likely sources of those nutrients are. And so, for example, what we see at the largest area of high nitrogen yield is in the upper Midwest. And the largest source in most of that area are agricultural inputs. But then other areas of the country, we see that urban sources are important, point source discharges and urban runoff. And those yields can be quite high as well. All of the results I just described can be accessed through the new online system, which we refer to as the SPARROW Decision Support System. This new web-based tool is a new and innovative approach that provides access to anyone to evaluate the model results, as well as actually utilize the models to test different strategies. We believe that, given that this is open to anyone, that it's really a no-cost mechanism for people to use to help develop their nutrient management plans. The system really provides three types of information. The first type is that it provides a capability of mapping nutrient loads, yields, and concentrations. The second type of information is that it provides a means of identifying those sources in a watershed that contribute to downstream loads. And the third type of information is the one where you can evaluate different management strategies for effectiveness. This slide is one example of a display. This is for the upper Midwest region. And what's illustrated here are nitrogen yields again, with the darker colors indicating the higher yields. So that map illustrated total yield to local streams. In other words, the yield due to all the sources combined in each catchment. But the system also allows you to illustrate the same yields for individual sources. This example is for point sources. And what you see here is that the darker areas are primarily where sewage treatment plants are located. And the darkest areas are where the largest sewage treatment plants are. And those are near major urban centers like Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland. Other sources have a different spatial pattern. This one is for atmospheric deposition. And generally what we see is that this source tends to be lower than the highest yields from other sources, but it's ubiquitous and it can be the largest source in some streams. And fertilizer has another spatial pattern. And these yields from fertilizer can be quite high where there's intense agricultural activity, such as in western Ohio. So the decision support system provides a way of easily seeing the differences in the spatial patterns of these sources. And agencies can quickly get an idea of how those patterns relate to regional water quality, and use that information in the way they develop their nutrient reduction plans. Further, since this system is open to anyone, we would hope that this would provide a common basis of understanding of the way sources affect downstream water quality and help to provide support for the implementation of the nutrient reduction plans. So all of those maps I showed reflected the inputs of local catchments to local streams. The system can also be used, though, to identify those areas and types of sources that affect downstream water quality. To illustrate that, I've selected the Illinois River watershed, but you can select any watershed throughout the country to do a similar type of analysis. The Illinois watershed is located southwest of Lake Michigan. Chicago is located in the headwaters. Flow is to the southwest, and the outlet is located on the Mississippi, and it discharges to the Mississippi and ultimately to the Gulf of Mexico. In the decision support system, by selecting that outlet, the system will then focus in on that watershed. It will identify that watershed and focus in on it and allow you to investigate what's contributing to the loads at that point. This map is similar to the ones we've already seen. It's the yields from catchments to local streams. The darker colors are the largest yields, and what you see in this particular watershed is that the highest yields are in the upper half of the watershed. This is the same map looking at yields to local streams, but to look at how upstream sources affect downstream loads, it's necessary to look at the watershed in a somewhat different way. We know that looking at how upstream sources affect downstream loads is more complicated because we know that processes affect the nutrients as they're transported downstream. For example, denitrification is a process where bacteria convert nitrogen to an inert form that's then removed from the water column. And we know there's a wide range of processes that affect nutrients, all of which can change them as they move downstream. So it's important to account for those processes in relating upstream sources to downstream loads. Now this next map also are yields, but are the yields as they relate from the catchments to the outlet. In other words, it's the same yield. The two maps are comparable, except that the one on the right accounts for those losses that occur from the catchment to the downstream location. What you see here is that the areas of high yield on the left may be important to the water quality of those local streams, but they're not quite as important to the load at the outlet. And so that's important information to know if your objective is to reduce the load from the outlet. And any watershed manager, that's information that will be useful to any watershed manager. And the decision support system provides a mechanism for easily getting that information. This is the same map as in the previous slide. And it shows which areas are the largest contributors to the outlet. But it's also important to look at which types of sources are important in contributing to that level. And so I've selected, to illustrate that, I've selected the Illinois again, and there are two large tributaries in the upper reaches of the Illinois. One of those is the Des Plaines River, and in that watershed is the city of Chicago. And because of that, what we see is that point sources are the largest contributor to the load from that tributary. Another tributary is the Kankakee River, which drains the area south of Lake Michigan. And what we see there is point sources are much less important, and this is more of an agriculturally dominated stream. The question for the nutrient reduction plan is, which source should I focus on? Models are particularly good at addressing those types of questions because they will appropriately mix those two streams along with all the others and get into the outlet of the watershed. And also account for the processes that affect nutrients as they move downstream. So what we find is that at the outlet, point sources are still important at 20% of the load, but they're not the largest. And agricultural sources are the largest at the outlet. And so this is important information that should go into any nutrient reduction plan. The main point of this is that location matters. The spatial arrangement between where sources are located in a watershed and what the water quality is downstream is important, and that information should go into any, should be important to any agency developing a nutrient reduction plan. The SPARROW decision support system provides a means for any agency in any watershed in those 6 regions to quickly develop that information and use that to develop a cost-effective nutrient reduction plan. The third type of information that the system provides is one where any user can use the model to test the potential benefits of nutrient reduction strategies. The way that works is that the inputs to the model could be changed as if nutrient reduction actions were already on the landscape and already changing the amount input to that catchment. Once those changes are made, the system will then calculate the amount exported from the landscape to the stream, the amount transported downstream, and then calculate the amount of reduction that one could expect. To illustrate that, I'll again use Illinois, and we'll assume there's a nutrient strategy on the table of reducing loads at the outlet by focusing on individual sources. And reducing each one of those by 25% to test how much benefit there would be with each one of those strategies. And so the first one is reducing point sources. And what we see is that there's only a 4% reduction in the load at the outlet by reducing point sources by 25%. In the upper reaches of the watershed, where those point sources are located, there would likely be a much larger benefit because the sewage treatment plants are located there. But as those nutrients move downstream, there are a lot of changes occur. As we saw, that's not the largest source. And that's why you don't get as much reduction from that 25% change. Another source is atmospheric deposition. If we reduce that by 25%, we still get 4% reduction. And the reason for that is, as we saw, atmospheric deposition is a relatively small source across the watershed. For fertilizer, we get a more substantial reduction at the outlet, and that's because, as we saw, that was the largest of the 3 sources we considered at that outlet. And so it makes sense that you would get the largest benefit from reducing that one. But the overall conclusion from these tests is that if 10% reduction is all you're looking for, then you could focus on fertilizer, and that might solve the problem. But in all likelihood, 10% might not be enough to achieve your water quality goal. So you might need to try a different scenario. And likely, what you need to do is take a more broad-based approach where you're looking at multiple sources. And we'll assume a scenario here where we reduce all 3 of those sources by 25%. What we see when we run that through the system is that we get an 18% reduction at the outlet, which is a little more substantial than what we saw in the others. And so the conclusion for this one is that really what's needed is a more broad-based reduction approach than focusing on any particular area. So the system can be used to evaluate a range of options for nutrient reduction strategies, but I need to emphasize that these simulations are the long-term benefits of these reductions. We know that there's a time lag between when management actions are put in place and when we actually see improvements in stream water quality. For example, much of the nitrogen that comes from the landscape is transported through groundwater. Groundwater moves very slowly, and so any reduction that you make on the landscape, it may take many years for that to translate through the groundwater system and actually see a reduction in stream water quality. So the system simulates the long-term benefits of these actions, and we feel that that's the most appropriate thing for the design of reduction plans. So with that, I'll quickly summarize and say that the models and the decision support system can support nutrient reduction planning in a number of ways. 3 important ways include identifying those areas and types of sources that are the largest contributors to downstream water quality. Those can then be prioritized for nutrient reduction actions. most important sources to downstream water quality, and then testing the potential benefits, potential long-term benefits of different nutrient reduction strategies. I wanted to emphasize that there's a URL in your briefing materials. The URL will take you to a website where you can access the publications for these results. It will also provide direct access to the decision support system itself and a fact sheet that describes all the results I went through today. Also, we want to try to provide a live demonstration over on the table after the briefing, if anybody wants to stay for that. And with that, I'll quit. And thanks again for your attention and attendance.
Excellent, Steve. Very, very interesting. Say it. Now you're going to talk to us about how to use the models in Tennessee.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Alan. I'm pleased to be here today, and I appreciate the USGS for the opportunity to share with you the state of Tennessee's nutrient reduction strategy for rivers and streams. Tennessee has over 60,000 stream miles and over 570,000 lake acres. From mountain streams in the Appalachians to cypress swamps in the Mississippi River floodplain, we have abundant and diverse water resources. The Nature Conservancy says that Tennessee is the country's most biologically rich inland state. Tennessee law declares that citizens have a right to unpolluted waters, and it's the state's job to secure, protect, and preserve this right. Where we find waters with good quality, we put measures in place to protect them. Where we find polluted waters, we do all that we can to reclaim them. We've sampled approximately half of our rivers and streams, and though while many of them have excellent water quality, not all of them do. Our industries and municipal wastewater plants have done a good job in removing pollutants. However, there is more work to be done. Water pollution from high levels of nutrients is an ever-growing and persistent problem. In Tennessee, we found that approximately 13% of our polluted streams are contaminated by nutrients. We determined this by comparing a stream's aquatic life and nutrient concentrations with what we know is normal for unpolluted streams. A stream is polluted by nutrients if the aquatic life is poor and the nutrient concentrations are above what is normal for that area. If we find a stream has healthy aquatic life, then we know that nutrient concentrations are within acceptable levels. Tennessee's goal was simple: to reduce nutrient loads so that they no longer cause pollution. Although actually achieving this goal is more complex, we believe that it is best done by breaking the state down into small watersheds and then developing and implementing realistic science-based plans at this level. The watershed target is what we call the best attainable condition, and is the watershed's expected state after pollution controls have been in place for some period of time. To get there, we need lower nutrient loadings from wastewater plants, urban areas, and agricultural sources. We use the SPARROW model output as an integral part of our nutrient reduction strategy. This tool is key to successful problem definition, targeted solutions, and gauging success. Our state lies within three major river basins: the Tennessee, the Cumberland, and the Mississippi. We started this approach in the Tennessee River Basin, and then we'll move on to the Mississippi and the Cumberland. The strategy that we've designed has 5 steps. 1, determine loadings. 2, compare man-made loadings with baseline. 3, calculate the best attainable condition. 4, implement controls. And 5, verify effectiveness. First, we use SPARROW model output to determine the estimated nitrogen and phosphorus loadings in each watershed and where they come from. SPARROW identifies atmospheric deposition, agriculture, wastewater plants, and urban areas as sources of nitrogen loading. It also identifies agriculture, native soils, wastewater plants, and urban areas as sources of phosphorus loading. Next, we compare the loadings from human-related activities with baseline loadings to prioritize watersheds for nutrient reduction. We use the atmospheric atmospheric deposition load as baseline for nitrogen and the load from natural soil as the phosphorus baseline. Those watersheds with higher loadings from discharges and other man-made sources will be identified for correction first. We also use the SPARROW model to show us how much of a source wastewater discharges represent, and then set permit limits for them based on their contribution. At the present time, few of our wastewater plants are designed for nutrient removal. This gives us a good opportunity to greatly reduce nutrients in some watersheds with reasonable, cost-effective measures. Where the relative contribution from wastewater plants is high, we require significant but still achievable nutrient reduction. Where the wastewater plants are a small fraction of the total load, we hold them where they are, but we don't require reduction. In the middle, we set discharge limits that can be readily met with standard technology. Then, we calculate the best attainable condition in each watershed by adding together the baseline load, the reduced loads from urban and agricultural sources after necessary pollution controls are put in place, and the remaining nutrient loads from improved wastewater plant discharges. The next step in the strategy is the actual implementation phase. This is where pollution controls are systematically applied in each watershed, and wastewater plants are modified for greater nutrient removal. For wastewater plants and urban sources, the implementation will be driven through the regulatory process, through permitting and in some cases enforcement where that's appropriate. For example, wastewater overflows of untreated sewage are often identified as sources of nutrient pollution. These discharges can effectively be eliminated through corrective actions that design engineers and wastewater system managers are able to bring about. Controlling agricultural sources must be accomplished on a voluntary basis. My agency, the Division of Water Pollution Control, works closely with our partners, the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, the University of Tennessee Extension, and other local agencies to best realize lasting implementation of these practices. Finally, the strategy requires monitoring of discharges as well as receiving streams to measure effectiveness. Through the regulatory process, we require dischargers and urban sources to conduct monitoring within their areas and to document nutrient-reducing measures. In addition to state monitoring data, we also receive data from other agencies such as the USGS, Corps of Engineers, and Tennessee Valley Authority. We will also work with our agricultural partners to evaluate pollution controls at the small watershed level. Not only will this monitoring help us to determine effectiveness, but it can also be used to improve and refine watershed laws, such as SPARROW, that we will continue to rely on as planning and management tools. We recognize that while some improvements may come to pass more quickly, such as those from wastewater plant upgrades, others will take much more time to implement and then even more time to produce observable effects. I thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you and appreciate the assistance of our federal partners as we work to protect and restore Tennessee's waters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Again, Wayne, Steve, Sarah, thanks for coming and giving us the information in the SPARROW model. Again, if anybody wants to stick around, there can be a demo here over the table, so feel free to do that. I don't know if there are any extra packets out front, but information on the December 2nd webinar is out there. So if there are any extra, I guess they can take one for your friends or whatever. And to all of you, each one, every one of you, thank you for your time and your interest. You've been attentive to the entire 1.5-hour period. And I think we'll call this briefly concluded. Again, thank you for coming.